How much?
about 25%.
Holy crap. See, I feel
But luckily,
extremely fortunate that none of my staff have had it, and I've been willing to take this financial hit, attempting to protect them, to protect the office, and protect my clients, and it's worked out. It's worked out, I think, very well.
I'd say so. If you've all been safe and haven't gotten it, you've been very lucky.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have four of us here. We are waiting on Ann may be late. Is that correct, Matthew?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And Mayor, I heard from Lisa Brainerd Watson. She will not be attending.
Okay, so actually we have five of us here. Maybe we have the five that are going to be here then, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we're going to call this meeting to order. Tonight, we're going to talk about options with policing for our community. And we're doing this not because we have a huge problem that needs to be addressed because crime is rampant in the city, or it's dangerous to live in Litchfield Park. The reality is that we live in a very, very safe community, and we occasionally have some things happen that are that get people concerned, but it would be an overreaction to say that we have a problem that we have to solve in terms of general public safety or basic public safety. But last year, we had some things happen during the last year, and after our budget process last year, sometime in maybe May or June, the issue was raised with, why don't we look at MCSO? Why are we using MCSO? How come we don't ever consider what's going on with MCSO? And the problem is that for us to make a change with the MCSO contract, we have to make that change in approximately mid-April each year. So if we don't have considerations of it early in the year, we lose the ability to make a change until the following year. So that we try to eliminate that, eliminate that for the council this year. This meeting was scheduled to look at options. I had asked Matthew to get costs for making changes in the MCSO contract, and also to see if either Avondale or Goodyear was interested in providing police service to us, what kind of proposals they might make. It had been probably, I'm going to guess, at least 4 years or 5 years since we asked for formal presentations from either Avondale or Goodyear. So this will give us at least some idea of what the options are. Tonight's meeting is designed to present council with a significant amount of information, but it's at a fairly high level. It's not going to answer every question you may have. It's actually designed to bring out your questions. And then if the consensus of the council is we want to look at this further, then we're going to have a follow-on work study next week so that we can get hopefully enough information to decide whether we want to make a change before the contract date that we have for making any notification to MCSO. And the change with MCSO is not just a decision to eliminate MCSO. It could be a decision that we want to change the number of beats that we have with MCSO. Any change with MCSO has to be incorporated by this anniversary date in April. So it's not just, the consideration is not simply do we want to replace MCSO, but we want to look at the issue of do we want to change the relationship with MCSO in terms of the number of beats. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Matthew, who can make our presentation. I would encourage you, I think Matthew's going to do a PowerPoint, so and I guess we'll end up with everybody, I'm hoping on the side of my screen. I'm not sure how this, are we still using the normal format for this Zoom meeting? Yes. So it's not, we're not doing that other format that arranges things differently. So in any event, we want council questions as we go through. So if you have a question, blurt in and ask the question. And if it gets out of hand, then I'll do something to try to get, some decorum back so we can actually get something accomplished. But, I would encourage you to ask your questions, but I would also encourage you to have some understanding that you may not get an exact complete answer. And if that's the case, it'll be something that will be brought back at the next work study if we decide to have another work study. So with that, we'll let Matthew get at it.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I would also like to thank our representatives that are with us on the call tonight from MCSO and the City of Avondale. If we have anyone from the City of Goodyear, we're very happy to have you guys here as well. As the Mayor said, as I go through the presentation, please, I will be shared screen, so I may not see you. But again, if you have questions, please let us know as we go along. We'll try to answer them the best that we can. Pages on the call as well for finance questions that I can answer, and we'll get through it together. Bear with me 1 second. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, Mayor and Council, as you know tonight, tonight's presentation is on public safety comparisons. We will be comparing quotes from MCSO, the City of Avondale, and the City of Goodyear. So first of all, to start off, some reasons why we're looking at this is just some issues we've had with MCSO in the past. MCSO has been the contract police provider since 2012. The contract was five-year term and 5 automatic renewals. Their current contract does expire June 30th, 2022. The no case litigation against MCSO has made it very difficult for MCSO to issue citations and also to hire enough staff because there's so many hoops they have to jump through because of this lawsuit. If you're familiar with what it is, it makes it very hard for them to do proper traffic enforcement because, again, there's just so many hoops to jump through. Since 2012, we've had an average increase of roughly 10% a year. I will tell you, if we stay currently at 3/4 beat, the price would actually drop some for next year. You'll see that later on in the presentation. But again, since 2012, a roughly 10% jump annually. We've had a lot of complaints of speeding and street racing on Litchfield Road and Old Litchfield Road, especially between the hours of 10 p.m. and midnight. You guys may remember this from last year. Had a lot of those. We had the speed wagon out there multiple times on Litchfield Road. We get complaints of lack of community policing and officer familiarity with city businesses and their business owners. That this has been something that we used to have in the past, and they don't feel like they have that now. As far as officers walking in the business, knowing the manager, knowing the owner by name, face-to-face interaction, so on and so forth. We have a lot of turnover with officers who serve Litchfield Park. That doesn't mean that they're leaving their jobs, but rather the officers that we see here changes up a lot. And because of that, again, we lose that familiarity we would have with them to know the city and know each other back and forth. So, also, as you know, we've had some resistance to enforcing the city truck ordinance. We've had a lot of discussions about this. I can say myself, I was coming into work the other morning at the intersection of Camelback and Litchfield, and I saw an MCSO Tahoe sit right beside a 10-wheel dump truck that turned down Litchfield Road, and they went opposite directions. So, slow response times. Officers busy outside the city. MCSO officers do work outside Litchfield Park. They're county cops. They work other places. Sometimes they're on other calls, but that can make response time slow. I will say I've seen this both ways with city staff. A few months ago, we had a little bit of a break-in at the rec in one of the tennis courts, and Tricia was over there, and it took over an hour and a half before anybody came out to see about that. On the positive side, a few weeks ago, we had a break-in at the old church that the city owns, and there was someone over there within 15 minutes, and they were very responsive. So again, I have seen both sides of that, just to be fair. Another one, city court business is down by 70% since 2015. Again, 70% court business down since 2015. Any questions on this slide so far?
Don't see any hands, and nobody's popping in, so we'll assume not.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Next, we'll have the police contract options. I tried to lay these out in similar format so you could see them apples to apples. But again, if you have questions as we go along, please let me know. The first one, again, is a little bit of review of the current contract. Again, our current contract is since 2012, initial term of 5 years, 5 automatic renewals. Again, it expires June 30, 2022. We are required, as MCSO is required, to let each other know by April 15th if we want to discontinue our contract for the next fiscal year. So again, if we were going to make a change, we'd have to let them know rather soon. We're currently contracted for 3/4 of a beat. A beat provides an MCS officer 24/7. It's a question of when they're here. As you know, it's a little complicated to explain. At 3/4 of a beat, that equates to 4 cops. Priority 1 calls have an officer here on scene within 5 minutes. Again, if criminal activity goes up drastically, the contract cost would go up. And that makes sense, obviously. If they have to have more officers here, their cost would go up. For this current year, the contract is $920,419, up from $503 since FY 2013. That represents an 82% increase, or a 10.25% increase, again, since 2013. Public safety options. I will present you guys with 4 different options. Option A would be to change the MCSO contract to a full beat. Option B would be to contract with Avondale. Option C would be to contract with Goodyear. And option D would be to continue as current at 3/4 beat service. Option A. So of course you see 3/4 beat on the left, full beat on the right. For a 3/4 beat, we have 4 cops, and the current cost is again $920,000. At 4 cops, that equates to 1,577 citizens per officer, based on city population. On a full beat, we would get 5 officers. Hold on one second, I have to move my window where I can see you guys. Full beat would be 1,267,438. That's for the first year. The second year would be 1,175,000, because there are some one-time expenditures there. Is the difference between the first and the second year.
Matthew,
Yes, sir.
this is Tom. Just curious, the officers per citizens, is there a benchmark or some idea of what the right number is supposed to be for a city like us?
Maybe I could give you some information, Tom. We actually asked that question maybe 18 months ago or so, and tried to get comparison numbers from the surrounding communities. And we found that we couldn't get anything that made any sense in terms of trying to compare our situation with the cities around us, because the staffing is broken up into so many different types of officers. So you may have a patrol officer, and then you may have a traffic officer, and then you've got detectives, and you got a lot of different categories. So it became very difficult to compare our situation of 3/4 of an officer that was assigned to us on a regular basis, to compare that with the surrounding communities. We couldn't get a number that made any sense to get that comparison, because that was one of the questions that we had when we first looked at this, again, probably 18 months ago. So the answer is no, we don't really have a good comparison, and I don't think we have an answer of what would just be a benchmark. We never came across anything.
Again, full beat, 5 officers. Full beat quote would be 1,267,000. Second year would be 1.175. From our current contract, again, of 3/4 beat at 920, that would be $347,000, or a 37% increase for the first year. After the first year, it would be a $254,000 increase, or a 27% increase. Again, 3/4 versus full. At 5 officers, that's 1,262 citizens per officer. Captain Broughton has told me that he believes that they could do this July 1, 2021, if asked. That would require the purchase of 1 new vehicle and equipment. So that is the difference in the cost, or some of it. There's other equipment there too, car, radio, etc. Any questions on MCSO contract full beat option? Okay, thank you. Option B is Avondale. Option B is the same way as the full beat of MCSO will provide 5 officers. The quote for Avondale full beat is $1,518,000 for the first year. Following year is $1,269,600. The cost versus our current 3/4 beat, it would be an additional $597,000 the first year, or 64% increase. After that would be $349,000 a year, or 37% increase. The cost versus a full beat with MCSO would be $250,000 higher the first year, or 19%. After that, it would be $94,000 higher, or 8%. Again, that would be a full beat with MCSO. That's 1,262 citizens per officer, again at 5 cops. I think one of the strengths with the Avondale option is community policing. Because Avondale has told us that they would dedicate 5 cops to be Litchfield Park cops. They wouldn't work in other patrols. They would be here in the city. And that's important for us because, again, you get that familiarity. You would know the officers, know the city, know the people. One thing I would also disclose, and I did ask the city manager of Avondale if he was okay with me disclosing this. The top 3 of the Avondale Police Department actually live in Litchfield Park. So I think by that, they'd be naturally invested as they do live in the city. Again, I did ask that before I shared that. They could begin July 1st, 2021. And how they could do that is they have 5 officers currently that have already been through academy that are doing the ride-alongs now with existing officers that they could shift to become our officers if we chose to pursue this route. So that's something to be considered. This would require the purchase of 3 new police vehicles. They do recommend Tahoes. From my experience, most PDs do use Tahoes. The city already owns one. The one we have is a 2013 and only has 13,000 miles on it. It's basically brand new. It probably would require a new radio because it's 8 years old. So the radio would probably have to be replaced just to go with the system. But on that, they would be our cars. So the advantage for that is if a few years from now we found that the Avondale wasn't working, those cars could go with us to whatever agency we chose. Obviously, they'd have to be re-decaled if that's something we wanted to do. Also, Avondale has mentioned the idea of listing both cities on the cars. Maybe it would be Avondale Litchfield Park Patrol, something like that. That could certainly be discussed, but that we'd have ownership between the communities, if that makes sense.
Matthew?
Yes, sir.
Paul Faith. You said the officers are in the academy that were coming. Are you saying that we're getting 4 brand new unseasoned officers?
I think that's a good question to ask. Terry, let me ask this question if I can do this. I know we have the Avondale chief on the line. Can I ask him that question?
Yes, you can.
Chief, are you here with us?
Yes, I am, Mr. Williams. Evening, Mayor, council members. Those 5 officers would not be assigned to Litchfield Park. Mr. Williams and I have talked. We would actually have a testing process by which officers are required to put in an application if they would to work at Litchfield Park. We would actually have a testing process, allow perhaps Mr. Williams or somebody on his staff to participate in that to make sure we select the right officers to come to Litchfield Park. So you would not be getting brand new officers. You would be getting officers probably in the 5-year, 10-year. We have some very good senior officers that are familiar with Litchfield Park. So you would be getting seasoned officers out here to serve your community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it.
Matthew, I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we currently own our sheriff's vehicles?
Yes, ma'am. We currently own the Tahoe and the Crown Vic are both ours.
So we have 2 right now.
Yes, ma'am. But they wouldn't use the Crown Vic. Most police departments don't like to use Crown Vics anymore. They have issues with where the gas tanks are.
Yeah.
A lot of them consider them a fire danger. I think it would be fine to use it for VIP for events. It'd be okay for that. But I would not recommend it be one of patrol cars.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Other questions on Avondale? Okay, thank you. Option C is Goodyear. The Goodyear option would provide 7 officers. Again, that is a difference from the others at 5. So Goodyear would offer 7. The quote for the Goodyear full beat is $1,987,000 the first year. Excuse me. Following years would be $1,471,000. Again, that is a large difference there from what we're currently paying, and a large difference from Avondale as well. Versus our current 3/4 beat contract, that would be $1,066,681 higher, or 115% increase the first year of what we're currently paying. After the first year, it would be $551,000 higher, or a 59% increase over what we're currently paying. On the full beat comparison, it would be $719,000 higher the first year, or 56%. After the first year, $296,000, or 25% higher. And that equates to 901 citizens per officer, again, because it's 7 cops, not 5. One downside to the Goodyear option is if we chose to go this route is they could not begin services until July 1 of 2022. So on one hand, that gives you time to plan. But again, that is a long time from now if that's something we feel like we need to do.
A question that this proposal brings up for the Avondale chief, if he's still here, I assume he's still here.
He's still here, Mayor.
Yeah, Chief, if the difference in the number of people in the quote from your quote to the Goodyear quote is in sergeants and detectives mostly, and I want to make sure, as I understood it that you had included in your quote some support personnel in addition to the actual officers that would be patrolling in the city. So if we needed a detective, or if we needed special traffic enforcement, so can you tell me what is in your quote beyond just the individual officers that would be working the community?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Council. Our proposal also included a full-time sergeant. So it would be 5 patrol officers, a full-time sergeant that would be assigned to your community to work with those officers, to make contact with council or city staff on any issues that come up. But it also included another officer that would be assigned to Litchfield Park. So actually 6 officers and a sergeant are included in our proposal. And that last officer could be a detective, simply work traffic enforcement on a full-time basis, perhaps be an SRO at the local elementary school if that's something they wanted for a couple hours a day, but also to provide some relief to an officer that perhaps was on vacation. They could fill in that shift without having to pay overtime. So they'd be also used for block watches, to do neighborhood resource duties that we have, which is to make contact with HOAs and solve neighborhood issues. So it would kind of be an all-purpose position that we factored into our proposal.
Okay, thank you. That answers the question. I was concerned that we had that type of support because we do need it on occasion. So that's appreciated. Thank you.
Actually, and I have a question, I guess, to tag on to Tom's. Why is that the difference between 5 and 7 then? Why one quote is 5 and the other 7? I mean, that seems to be quite a bit, in my opinion.
It's a big difference. There's some other differences in the contracts too. It's just different, and some of the differences are just ways the cities operate between Avondale and Goodyear. But yes, ma'am, it is a substantial difference. Some of it is the officers, though. Yes, I will tell you from my experience, an officer generally costs you more in benefits than they do in pay, because just police benefits are high, mostly due to PSPRS and insurance.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, do we need 7 officers? That seems like a lot compared to what we have now, anyway.
I think 7 would be a lot. I mean, too many officers isn't necessarily a bad thing, but currently we have 4. Other questions on the Goodyear slide?
Matthew, it's Tom. I have a quick question. I'm just curious, and maybe it's more directed towards the chief. Just curious if in Avondale's quote, there's flexibility on the number of people. Is it sort of the smallest staffing that you guys do, or is it possible to have a smaller staff?
We could negotiate that, but a normal patrol schedule to get 24/7 coverage is going to include a minimum of 5 officers. So if you don't factor in any other traffic enforcement or anybody being on vacation, and that's why we added one more to provide that relief, and then to do the detective work, to do the traffic enforcement, to work with the schools and work with the HOAs in the community, just that extra level of service that I think Litchfield Park would expect from Avondale.
One thing I might tell you, sir, my personal experience from that. In my last town, I had 5 cops, including my chief. And I didn't want my chief on patrol because chiefs should be doing administrative work. And we actually had a 4-hour gap in coverage every night. So I worked out the schedules where we had coverage 24/7, and it can be done with 4 cops. However, it gets tired officers, and tired officers puts them in bad situations where they're not as responsive as they should be. And I've done that before, but I don't feel like it works very well. I tried it, and I went back to 20-hour service a day because I felt like it was putting my officers in danger, just from previous experience that I've had.
And another thing to consider, though, if there's any consistent, overall, we've had very good comments from our citizens about MCSO. But if there's any consistent issue that's brought up, it's the fact that we don't have somebody in the park 24/7. And so the question becomes, which of the hours a day are you not going to have somebody here? And how do you explain that to somebody who gets hurt or who needs a policeman during that time? So that issue of having them available 24/7 is actually one of the things that, if there's a consistent question that various residents bring up, that is the question. So.
Anything else on the Goodyear slide? Okay. Option D, of course, would be to stay with MCSO as our current contract. Again, we currently pay $920,000 a year. We have received the quote from next year that it would actually decrease to $898,000 for FY22. That's a $21,000 savings. That's due to decreased dispatch services and also decreased overtime cost. So again, that is a savings. But the current MCSO contract, again, has been in place since 2012. It expires June 30th, 2022. So even if we stayed with MCSO another year, we would have to go out for RFP in spring of 2022. So the cost could change drastically then anyway, just because we've been in this contract now for 10 years. So that's something to be considered. That being said, we haven't gone out for RFP, and who knows what it would come in at, but it's certainly something to be thought about.
A question for you, Matthew. And I think I saw that Joe Estes was on the phone or on this in this meeting.
Yes, sir, he is.
And that is, if we were to make a decision, we wanted to change something in this contract, either change to a full beat or change to either Avondale or Goodyear. Have we done what we have to do from a formality standpoint to be in a position to comply with the purchasing laws?
You mean procurement for professional services such as this?
Yeah, Matthew had brought up the fact that we might have to go out on an RFP next year when this contract came up. We didn't use a formal RFP process to get proposals from Goodyear and Avondale. So I'm just asking, do we have an issue that would be behind this, that of compliance with procurement laws, if we wanted to make some change in this contract?
No, I don't think so, because essentially you're going to be entering into an intergovernmental agreement.
Okay, good. I like that answer. Thank you.
Sure makes things easier. Thank you, sir. Any other questions on MCSO as current? Okay. Other factors. Again, we currently have a contract with Flock Safety. Again, these cameras are actually being put up over the next 2 weeks in the city. I'm sure you've seen some this week and around the city. Flock Safety has an MOU in place with MCSO. If we switch to Goodyear or Avondale, either city would have to get an MOU established. I have asked that question of both Goodyear and Avondale. They would both be willing to do that and would see no problem doing that. So that is a base we could cover. Same thing with flock safety. They'll do what they need to do to get an MOU in place. Also, contracting with Avondale or Goodyear would eliminate the possibility to use the sheriff's posse. The sheriff's posse program is part of the sheriff's office. If we're not using the sheriff's office anymore, we wouldn't have posse, unfortunately. So that is a downside to it. However, both Avondale and Goodyear use similar programs known as VIPs. They're volunteers in policing. Usually it's retired cops. I think they actually call them VEPs. I've had VIPs in previous communities that I've used for this exact sort of program. And it's worked very, very well for me in the past in other communities. So there is that option there. And as I told Councilmember Donahue earlier, that's what I would want to use the Crown Vic for just that. So, questions on these? Okay. Recommended action. To me as a manager, part of my job is to make recommendations to council what I honestly think. And of course, the decision is yours. And it's part of this. After looking at the options and the issues that we've had, I would recommend that we contract with the city of Avondale for services beginning July 1 of 2021. And in my opinion, it would provide better community policing, officers that are dedicated to the city, as far as actually being here in the city, if that makes sense, and also ownership between the two organizations. Again, if we chose to do that, it would require a special council meeting for a vote and a notice to MCSO by April 15th of our intentions. Questions on that? As far as the cost increase of the coverage, changing police services from MCSO to Avondale would cost. I'm sorry, sir, go ahead.
I think we had a question from the vice mayor. I saw his hand come up and his mute sign went off.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. A lot of our officer time is spent, we have quite a few accidents at the corner of Camelback and Litchfield Road. And I think most of that intersection is actually in the county. Would this, and I would presume that our officers would often go to that accident scene and then not be involved in the county. Are we picking up a little bit of extra police services by not sending our officers into Camelback and Litchfield Road accidents? That makes sense.
Yeah, whatever the situation is today at Litchfield and Camelback, there's a significant amount of work being done to change that in the future so that intersection will be a Litchfield intersection. So in terms of trying to make a decision that could have long-term impacts, it would not be wise to base it upon what happens in that intersection today, because the jurisdiction for that intersection is, I think, will change, I'm hoping, in less than the next year.
Okay. The other question I've got, that Crown Vic, I mean, not Crown Vic, the Tahoe that we have was given to us by a grant from the Indian Casino in Glendale. And they ask us every year if we want to put in applications. Do we have any applications pending that might take some of the bite out of this?
As far as police cars, sir?
Yes.
No, sir, we don't. I have actually written those grants for other communities, though. We could look at that. It all depends on how they're funded.
Okay, we probably should keep that going every year, because they're looking for, police services is one of the things on their list that they're trying to devote those monies to.
Sure.
The other question I've got,
I'll look into it.
okay. The other question I've got is we've been trying to assist the MCSO posse to kind of get rejuvenated here. What happens to them with this situation? Or do they go away? Do they still stay in our city and do things? What do we do with the posse?
It's my understanding, sir, that they can no longer work in Litchfield Park because they work as part of MCSO, so that they couldn't work with us. Unfortunately, like for example, in Sun City West, they have the MCSO posse and they have the Sun City posse.
Right.
And I've had this discussion up there with their commander that if MCSO went away from Sun City, that only the Sun City posse would remain, not the MCSO posse, if that makes sense. So it's my understanding we couldn't use them anymore, unfortunately.
Can we can our nonprofits, our festivals, our organizers still hire them on a hourly basis to attend functions, to police functions? Do we need that still? How's that going to be handled?
I would recommend we use VIP, sir, because both Avondale and Goodyear have the VIP program. I would recommend we use that. That's how they do events. I would recommend we use them for events. I don't think we could use posse members because they're under command of MCSOs. I don't think we could do that. I could be wrong. If you don't mind, Chief, you're still on the call with us. That your VIPs are used for your city events, correct? And they could work hours. Am I correct in that assumption, sir?
That is correct. And they don't get paid even when they work our city events.
Thank you, Chief. When I had VIPs in Pine Top, I was the community event services person at the time, and our police VIPs there were retired cops. And when I was going to have them at an event, basically we'd buy them lunch and make sure they were taken care of for the day, but we never actually paid them to be there for the day. But that being said, I didn't have events of 15 to 20,000 people in Pine Top either, so that could be apples to oranges.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes,
sir.
Councilman.
Two things, Matthew, please. One, I'm quite concerned about the Goodyear proposal not going into effect for virtually another year. If we were to move that direction, that I think leaves us open to kind of an ugly situation. But what of the other two contracts? Now, you said that the county had a 5-year with a 5-year extension, but what about the Avondale? What's the duration of that contract, and how does that compare?
As far as when they could start, you're correct, sir. Goodyear couldn't start till July 1 of 22. Both MCSO and Avondale could start July 1 of 2021. So they could both start this summer, if that answers that question. I would agree with you. If we chose to go with Goodyear now, that would put us in a very uncomfortable situation for the next year and 3 months. I would agree with that. Also, as far as the contract goes, I think that would be up for negotiation with the city of Avondale. Gina, are you still on the call with us?
Yes, I'm still here.
Do you mind introducing yourself, Gina?
Sure. I'm sorry, I was in my drive home on my car. Apologize for that. My name is Gina Montes. I'm assistant city manager, and my city manager has asked me to work with Mr. Williams and Chief Nanagay to possibly negotiate an agreement. We're definitely open. I would recommend a 5-year agreement, but we would have, outs after each year for either party, so with plenty of notice. So I think it's going to take a year or two to see really how it works for Litchfield and see how everyone feels. But so I was thinking, 1-year renewal options up to 5 years but that's definitely something we are willing to discuss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Other questions, sir? Okay.
So I guess
Back
what we
to
need.
the-
Oh, you got more
Go ahead, sir.
presentation?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No problem. Back to this one. Again, changing police services from MCSO to Avondale would cost $1,518,000 first year, or $1,269,000 second year. Again, versus our current contract, $597,000 first year, $349,000 second year. Also, as the city would now own the cars, we would have to plan for CIP replacement of those cars. As small as we are, I think those cars would probably last 6 to 7 years. When you're a city this small, it's not so much the miles that kill the cars as it is idle hours. Because again, it's such a small city, you're never really getting up to that real high speeds. So I think that would be appropriate. Tahoes are running about $65,000 now for police Tahoes with equipment. So at 7 years, that would put us at $260,000 in FY29. Obviously, we could set aside money for that every year, or lump sum payment in FY29, but that would be something we would need to plan for eventual CIP replacement. Again, that's 7 years from now, but something to have in mind. As far as how we would pay for this, obviously there's multiple ways. The city received $738,000 in CARES funds for police services. We got half of that last year, half this year. That freed up $738,000 in general funds, of which after the business assistance grants, we have $558,000 left over from CARES funds. I'm sorry, from the funds that it freed up. So that's one thing. Another option would be for this year, for next year, we're projected to receive $212,000 in construction sales tax from the La Loma Sun Health Project. That is just for 1 year, of course. But those would be two options. There will be some additional funds coming in from the latest round of COVID funding. However, the restrictions are being outlined on that. It looks like it may just be for water, sewer infrastructure, as CARES was for police. So I didn't include that because we don't know all the requirements on that yet. Also, of course, the city does have a healthy balance. You know, we bring in a lot more in revenues every year than we have in expenditures. But I think the balance there is the city center bond, as you know, as we've been discussing. I think we could pay it, but some of that is the timing of the sale of land in city center. Again, I think we'd be okay. We have plenty of money cash on hand reserves. I just want you to be aware of that. I know this is a little complicated. Any questions on this slide?
Vice Mayor.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Matthew, with these proposals you solicited, has there been any conversations as to what happens if our population increases by 10% in the next year or two?
No, sir, not at all, but we could certainly have that discussion and have an answer by next week.
Any other questions or comments at this time?
Yeah, one follow-up to Paul's question. Matthew, it might be interesting to find out what the population growth is expected to be for us in the next year or two, just with the Sun Health project and Cache finishing up, et cetera. Because that could be meaningful.
Sure, we can certainly do that. You said Sun Health and Cache, sir?
Yeah, well, you know better than I do sort of what the home construction and et cetera is going to be like. So you can guess probably, I would assume, at the population growth we'll see.
Okay, we'll be glad to look into it. Other questions on this slide? Okay. And that's all I had. So again, Mayor and Council, you have my recommendation. If there's any questions you have, I've written down the questions you had as we go along. I do have Paige on the line if you have any questions for her as far as cash on hand, as far as reserves. We certainly have that information ready if you'd like to know any information about that.
What I would like to have is an indication of whether the individual council members are interested in pursuing this, so that we get to another level of detail in the discussions going forward, so that we would have another presentation in a week and be in a position where we could decide whether we want to have a special meeting to make any changes. So it'd be helpful if we could get some input on whether you would like to pursue this idea and get it in, get a little more detail on it, get it to the point where I'm assuming you're not at the point where you'd want to make a decision tonight, and where it's not an action item, but if everybody is far enough along where you know what your decision would be anyway, we can also just schedule a meeting and make a decision. So what's the pleasure of the council on how to proceed on this?
I'll speak first. I'm very much in support of looking at all of this and looking at possible change.
Okay. Any other input? Councilman Roman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, Matthew, nice presentation. Job well done. Appreciate all the input. For me, I think it's time for a change. Change can be good in a lot of different ways, but I personally am relatively disappointed in the status quo.
Okay, other comments? Councilman Clare.
So MCSO will still have some responsibility to us, just not a beat. as county residents, though, correct? So there'll be a layer of additional policing with MCO's responsibility for us as county residents.
I don't know the answer to that, but that's something we can get an answer for and discuss in the next meeting. But I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we are still county residents, so you would think that we would have some coverage from the county, but I don't know how the county would interface if we were using either Goodyear or Avondale as the local police force.
One more question, Mr. Mayor. The investment in Flock that we've just made, any issue with Avondale being able to integrate that into their system?
They said they would consider an MOU, so I'm assuming not, but that's another question that, again, if council is interested in looking at a change, then that's something we can pursue in maybe a little more detail with Avondale and Goodyear before the next meeting.
Thank you.
Find out.
Mayor?
Yes. Who said that?
Me, Councilwoman Brainerd.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see a hand and I didn't know you were down there.
I am. It just says council member, but doesn't tell my last name. First of all, Matthew, thank you for your presentation and for all the details you've provided. It's a good presentation as usual. I would like to consider this further and to look at it further. I think we've gotten pretty good service from the sheriff's group, and from MCSO, but there are times when I feel like, and we call them pretty frequently in our little neighborhood, I'm surprised at how often. And sometimes we get really good service and sometimes we don't. And I'm surprised at the times when I call them and tell them, hey, this is going on. And if you get someone out here now, you can bust them for this because there's a drug transaction going on right now. And how many times there's absolutely no response and they never come by. So I would like to see, and part of that I'm sure is the fact that they're spread so wide and far, that we're way out here and they cover so much of the county. So I think the idea of being, linked to, to Avondale or Goodyear, sorry, trying desperately not to cough, to Avondale, Goodyear, either one of those where they're local to us and close to us would be a positive thing to investigate. I would like to see a little more detail on how do we break up, to use the analogy, without it being quite so awkward and uncomfortable for the time period after we don't renew the contract. Is there something we can do to make that transition less painful and to make sure that we're getting good service and good coverage for our residents in the meantime? So that's all I have.
Thank you. We'll certainly look into that.
Any other comments? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I like the presentation that we had, and I think, as I mentioned before, I think it's probably time to seriously consider maybe a change. One of the things that this brings to us that we don't have now is the ability to interact with the top people in government who are controlling these, the local police departments. Trying to go to the sheriff's office and talk to whoever the top dog is there and get their attention, they're spread a little thin. Being able to, as we socialize with the Avondale council members, the Goodyear council members, as we see the managers, as we see the chiefs in the communities, I think we've got a lot better communication method to express our concerns and probably get feedback and to get things done. So I think this is probably a good move for us. I'm concerned about the increase in expenses. We've been very fortunate. My 17 years, we're in the best financial situation we have ever been in. Our finances, I don't think have ever looked this good. We're going about in various different methods of spending this money. Let's hope the money keeps rolling in. We've been kind of on a course of promoting commercial and trying to slow down the more expensive residential, and we need to, I think, stay that course if we're going to be continue to spend money like this. But I'm in favor. I really think that having a full-time person dedicated to the city who's driving the streets would be very, very helpful. The citizens would like it. I think it's a good move. Thank you.
Councilor Stossy.
My thoughts aren't a lot different than most of the others. I do really appreciate the presentation, Matthew. Nicely done. I think maybe the things I think that might be a little different, I'm certainly in favor of talking more about the potential change. I think with the changes we see coming in our city in the relatively near future with development at city center and the growth of Sun House property, et cetera, the need to transition to a full beat from 3/4 of a beat is probably just a question of a year, which year, but it's certainly going to happen in the next 2 or 3, if not this year. And I think as those things develop, the idea of community policing, the idea of having consistent officers who are, ours effectively, maybe not in name, but they're the ones who serve Litchfield Park and they're consistent. And that just sounds really attractive to, build a relationship between our policing force and our community. Just sounds really attractive to me. So I'm definitely interested in further conversation.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I think that's pretty much everybody. I don't see anybody else waving their hand. So the direction, I think we've given direction to Matthew and the rest of the staff. We will get another presentation together. We'll have another work study that will get involved in this a little bit deeper, and see what we can, if we can get to the point where after that work study we'd feel comfortable scheduling a special meeting to take up the issue and actually make a decision. So if you have thoughts during the next several days, please communicate them to Matthew so that he can take them into account and be ready to deal with them at this next meeting. And we will try to make it as efficient as possible so that we can get you the information so everybody feels comfortable making a decision but not be, not have the meetings run too long. So thank you for coming this evening. We've gotten it done in less than an hour, which is that's a good accomplishment. It's a lot of material, a lot of information, and it's a very big decision. So it's one that you'll have a week to think on to see how you feel about it after you've thought about it for a week. Because it is a significant change from what we've been doing in the past if we decide to move to another policing organization other than MCSO. So it'll give you some time to consider it and consider it in more detail. So if there's nothing else, we'll have a motion to adjourn this meeting. Moved by moved by Councilman Rostosi, seconded by Vice Mayor Faith. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned. Again, thank you for your time. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.